Welcome to Reflections, a program where we discuss values and virtues for the transformation of the individual and the society in general. I am Father George Ehusani, and I have with me in the studio once again today my friend Dr. Sam Amadi. Sam Amadi had worked with me at the Catholic Secretariat as head of our think tank, the Bishops' Conference of Nigeria think tank, dealing with a lot of the issues of our country at that time. This is 20 years, almost 20 years ago.
Yes, I think that should be like 2005.
2005. Okay.
About, yeah.
Now, Dr. Amadi is a constitutional lawyer, Harvard trained. He served for how many years?
5 years.
5 years as chairman of the National Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Nigerian
Electricity Regulatory Commission, and superintended the part of the privatization and so on. And then he is now senior lecturer and head of department of public law at Bayes University. I am happy to have you back in the studio. Unfortunately, they said there's COVID-19, so I won't touch your hand.
Yes.
Now, we are here today to discuss the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020, which the president signed into law on the 7th of August this year. It has generated a lot of controversy, especially certain provisions of certain sections of this new law, which was an updating of the 1990 Companies and Allied Act, which basically was meant, as we are told, to ease the processes of setting up companies so that business people, investors will be attracted to, the country to do things. But certain sections have been introduced that are new and appear problematic for a number of non-profit organizations, particularly religious organizations. So we are going to discuss some in this, your reasoned impressions and analysis of the section 839, especially paragraph 1 and 2, that appear to give a non-judicial officer powers to suspend the head of an organization, and for 30 days there's nothing you can do, right? Suspend on his own if he considers for reasonable
public interest and
public interest, and if he considers now outside the jurisdiction of the court. And yet there's a section, a subsection of that same section 839 that subjects the processes to the law court. So there appears to be a contradiction, right? And then we also have, while this new Cama act or law tries to make things easier by recognizing that you can have a sole trustee, a sole director in a company. So we couldn't have a sole director before, but now you can have a limited liability company that is sole person. Good. Now, it now went and removed the possibility of a sole director, of a sole trustee from a non-for-profit organization, which churches belong to. Now, so in cases of churches, for example, where, let's say in the Catholic Church worldwide, where the bishop is the sole trustee of a diocese, the new law, the implication of the new law is that it is no longer going to be possible. So let's begin. What is your general appraisal of the Cama 2020, which is just awaiting gazetting, and then it becomes, law, and it can be implemented?
Well, first, it's clear, as at now, it's law.
As at now, it is the law.
It depends that once it has been passed by the both houses and the president has signed, accepted to it's law. Gazetting is a routine way of official documentation, so that people can easily take it to court, present it as official document, so they know the source. So some kind of authentication that this.
So as far as legality is concerned, this is now the law.
This is the law. Okay, now stepping back, generally, like you said, this has been a long discussion around reforming the Corporate and Commercial Company and Allied Matters Act as a way of further improving doing business environment, as a way of facilitating formation of companies and somewhat corporate governance. So in many ways, it's a positive improvement.
In many ways, positive improvement on the 1990 Act.
So for example, you talked about a single person can raise a company now. So you don't need to create a fiction of you, your wife, your children, underage, everybody.
Which is what people used to do.
People do. So they put a company, they share among their even unborn children. So now you can just come and
so people used to put names of their unborn children so that they'll be directors.
Yes, directors. So you just go and form a company, and we know that this is your company. Again, foreigners, I mean, sometimes foreign companies, people may want to invest in the country, and they need to domesticate that entity in Nigerian law. And then you force them to look for partners. Who are they going to go with? People they are not sure. So somebody can come and form a company in Nigeria in his own name. So that's an improvement. Again, it's if you look at trusteeship, things like oftentimes company registered by guarantee, you apply for consent of the Attorney General, and for 2 years, 3 years,
it doesn't come.
Nobody, in fact, the file is probably not even, nobody knows where it is. And now the law seems to provide a time frame and say, look, if you don't get it in 30 days, then the Registrar General will authorize you to go and publish if there's no
objection from the public.
Or even if the objection is frivolous, they will now process you and then you do the other registration procedure. So those are some of the highlights. And again,
positive.
It also improves corporate governance in terms of looking at the management of the companies and issues. But the section 839, the problem with it is, first, we shouldn't forget that the company registration does not negate the right to freedom of association. You know, people understand it.
The fact that there is corporate governance, there is a regulation, should not
be seen as negating the right of Nigerians to associate. It shouldn't override the right to freedom of religion, which is the kernel of fundamental rights. The idea of free conscience, free opinion, free religious beliefs, those are critical. So what that means, therefore, is that corporatization is to allow you to enjoy some status. It does legal status.
To be able to open bank account.
Yeah, and so on and so forth. I mean, people should actually open bank accounts in their name, but the entity has to have a legality so that people can say, this is the entity and we can proceed against you in law in that entity. But nothing stops citizens from, even churches really are not obligated to register anything. Somebody can say we are a church. I mean,
what about things like bank account and so on?
No, you're not saying, not in the name of the church. I want to draw a distinction that the idea of freedom of association is beyond registration. Okay. Now, and this is the theory. States require registration, what we call overriding public interest. So when you say you must register, it's because states now feel there's an interest in the state to know your legal status.
You're gathering people.
Legal status, so that we can also proceed against you. So if Father Ehusani does something wrong as a natural person, we can proceed against Father Ehusani. But if Father Ehusani and the center he's running, if the center does something wrong, or he does something wrong in the name of the center, then we can proceed against that center. But if the center is not registered, then it puts people in difficulty. So the public interest here is for the state has overriding public interest to ensure that before you can do X, you attain this X status. Now, what flows from this, therefore, is that your intervention should be calibrated, not to override the rights of people where the state has no overriding interest. If you look at it as section 839, the first premise is the assumption that because a company, registered trustees are trustees. Why are they registered trustees? They are trustees of the mandate of the organization. So the bishop is a trustee of the Catholic Church in this diocese, representing Vatican, and accountable. So,
and it's accountable to the Vatican.
To the Vatican. So that's the idea of representation, the idea of trustee. So they are a trust. So the state can now say, okay, fine. It's possible that the trust may fail in administering that trust. Who has the right to first punish or take action? Of course, the trustees, the people who the trustees represent, who, in this case, the bishop, the pope, the Vatican.
And by the way, in the case of dioceses, we have annual returns.
Exactly. No, I'm just coming. There's several accountability procedure. Accountability to the parishioners themselves. Accountability to the appointed authority, in this case, Vatican. Okay, and so on and so forth. To the metropolitan, depending on different levels of accountability. Good. Now, when you now come to the state has criminal law, criminal rules that if you infringe against them, the state go against you. So, for example, they find that you're a bishop appointed by Vatican does not mean that if you are involved in criminal transaction,
anything that violates Nigerian law,
you will be proceeded against.
Yes.
Okay. So if the church also violates those things, they could be proceeded against.
Correct.
So the idea now of saying, if you look at conventional corporate law, what happens is that creditors, those who suffer, can apply to court for winding up. So if we're a member of this company and the company is not paying us and the company is bankrupt, so we can now say, look, declare it bankrupt, let the asset be sold, and order of priority, people pay, so that now appoint a receiver manager whose job is to pay off those debts, because that company can't work again. Now, the trick thing about NGOs is that first, that the overriding public interest also now is to allow NGOs to be free, because their contribution to society is that they are non-profit and they're not non-governmental. So government does not want to control them. Government allows them to exist on their own. So now, for that premise, you should not easily interfere in the runnings of the NGO. If you take a church, for example, and that's a critical point here, the church or religious institutions, whether it's Islamic institutions, whether it's native traditional religious,
yes,
whatever,
or Christian institutions,
or even philosophical, deeply philosophical groups, confraternities. The distinctive feature is that they deal with what you can call comprehensive moral doctrine. They deal with the idea about how the world is.
They deal with issues of transcendence.
Transcendence, metaphysical transcendence, basically. How man is related with God, what should be the duty of man on earth, all kinds of things that are not secular, in the sense that they are not rationally determined. So you can't say, for example, if an NGO says our job is to feed the poor, that's a rational, secular. So it could be a Muslim doing that, it could be a Christian doing that, it could be a Zoroastrian doing that, it can be a Buddhist doing that. So we can interchange. You can say, okay, a Muslim sits here. They might have different motivations for doing it, but essentially what they are doing, what they ought to deliver is very clear. But if you say you are Catholic congregants worshiping God, you can't just say that a Pentecostal can as well lead that process.
No.
You cannot say that a Muslim can as well lead that process. So these are distinctive. They are areas that are exclusive because they deal with conflicting and irreconcilable differences. Yes. At least in the sense that you can't sit now and say, okay, I'm a lawyer. Let me reconcile between Catholics, Anglicans, and Methodists on doctrine.
Yes.
There's no rational framework for you to say we have reconciled.
And the law, Section 839, does not make any such distinction.
That's the point. So the assumption that you can now remove the trustee and appoint a trustee manager. Presume that the work to manage is functional work.
Yes.
It's okay, run this administration.
Yes.
But the work you're doing is spiritual.
Yes.
It's esoteric in some cases.
And the disagreement that led to conflict in the association may be doctrinal.
That's the point. In which case you can say, okay, just put this man on. So that's the difficulty. And that should be a reason why the state will withdraw. Again, if you are going to even intervene, it should be the court. Because the difference between the court and administrative process is that the judicial process has the full safeguard of hearing, procedures, transparency. Now, when the central bank is going to decide to penalize a bank, or when NEC, the regulator of electricity, decides to, the public might not be involved.
Yes.
The rules of engagement are not as extensive and as clear as that of a judicial body. So some may not even have you hire any lawyer. And by the way, that section, 839 sub 1, does not create any what they call intelligible standard criteria of how would the commission act.
No, it just says that if the commission determines reasonably that this thing is being badly run.
So it amounts to if the Registrar General determines, because even internally they don't even have clear rules of process for adjudicatory hearing. So the problem is that it's both abuse of power is imminent in it. One man, Registrar General, has the power for public interest. Now, a different thing. What's public interest?
It's subjective.
What's public interest?
What I call public interest may not be what you call public interest.
Exactly. So these kind of actions, even if we need to entertain such powers, it should be powers that were defined. If a court confirms that Mr. Soso has stolen money, things that are verifiable, things that are criminal, or there is murder, there's something. So on that basis, somebody can say, okay, what will trigger it are things that are clear. But public interest. Public interest could be that this group is abusing the president of Nigeria, could be that this group is raising a call for some substantive restructuring. As when a church or a religious group takes upon itself that they think the future of Nigeria requires restructuring,
and people they are very aggressive about it.
On that, and people in the government thinks this is dangerous for the country. Basically, public interest now requires
public interest as defined by those
that's a public interest. So public interest has become a cloak for people to serve private interest. So the danger in this is one is that some people assume that the court the two sections are disjunctive. Section 1 and 2 are not related. So it creates the idea that the commission can on its own so moto, as the lawyers will say, proceed against a trustee, remove him and appoint a trustee. The court can also, through its procedure, also go through. So two different powers.
How do you give the same power to two different entities? The judiciary, the functions of the judiciary appear to, by this section, be usurped by executive.
Yes, we can say that the power of we know that in administrative law, administrative agencies has the power to do adjudicatory hearing, but the point we're making here is that this is a sensitive issue that should not be what it should leave to administrative hearing. That's the point. Number two is that since you've said that the commission can, by application to the court, can apply to the court with evidence, then the section 1 becomes not necessary.
Yes.
Because they could, if they really have, through their oversight and investigation, documentations against
they go to court.
They go to the court, and that we've seen several cases where churches have gone to court to contest, especially the non-orthodox ones, leadership issues, and the court have settled it fairly well, settled among disputants, not to impose anybody. Yes. So the critical point missing here is the fact that the commission can itself remove persons, and by itself put in persons, the commission. Again, even for NGOs, the mainstream NGOs are not churches or religious organizations, is it actually dangerous in an era that we have seen increased relapse authoritarianism? Globally, actually, we've seen that under the environment of fear, threats, and crisis,
there is a siege mentality.
Exactly, that people in power are using the opportunity of fear. People are frightened about the future, about pandemic, about economic crisis, to destroy institutions and relaunch authoritarian regimes. We've seen it even in the US, that's exemplary in democracy. Talk to us about Nigeria. We've seen new regime of harsh so-called hate crime laws. We've seen stiffer regulation of social space. And so this now kind of marks a heightening of threat against free society, threat against speech, especially in a country where we are becoming increasingly contentious in the discussions. There are many issues to debate.
That's the point, that this is coming at a time when much of the trust that the citizens should have in leadership is eroded.
And citizens are contending against many things.
And citizens are contending against many. So anything you bring out that smacks of, whatever,
creates opportunity for the state to go against. So it's wrong timing, because if we were less conflicting society, if the social capital was very good, if trust in government was high and government was not panicky. Today, governments in Nigeria are panicking. State governors are arresting people. People are speaking out. People are being put in detention. In fact, we've had about more than 5 cases now of speech. People who are guilty at most of inconvenient or irreverent speech being slammed with terrorists. So if the state security can slam a citizen with terrorism for writing article disrespectful of public official, and you are framed a terrorist. Now think about what they would do to institutions, NGOs, or
if they have power.
If they have the power that they seem to be opposed. So we are in a high level of intolerance. And so for a National Assembly properly constituted, that's the danger now, to have smuggled that provision. And by the way, there was an NGO bill that had similar provision, which was resisted.
2016 Act.
Exactly. Now they went back.
2016
and they now went back to put it inside this Cama, where people, of course, it's a over 900 or 800 or 900 section law. So probably many people wouldn't even have time to go through the provisions. And
if you have a 600 and something page document and then somewhere in section 8
there is something,
you now have something.
In fact, Nigerian public officers are famous for not having the attention span to go through 3, 4, 10 pages. They don't have good assistants. We don't have centers elsewhere. We have centers dedicated to legislative research, monitoring, doing cost-benefit analysis, critiquing laws for their impact on liberty, impact on economy, impact on social welfare. So we don't have those things. So
this brings me to the point of the processes of lawmaking. This thing came out August 7, 2020. And I don't know when public hearing was called. Was it during the lockdown? I don't know when public hearing was called. I'm supposed to know. I mean, I'm an enlightened Nigerian.
And engaged.
And engaged. And many people never knew when public hearing was called.
That's the problem with legislative. I was a special advisor to the Senate President once, and one of the problems with they do what they call so-called social public hearing. Now, the idea of public hearing, first is that who are the stakeholders? You get with those who have expertise. That means those who know, and then you go to those who will be affected. Now, this kind of public hearing, there will be an official communication to NGOs that are registered frontline. They would have invited officially, not just on air, all the leadership of the major
Islamic organizations,
all the leaders of the major religious groups, even within the you give the Catholic Church, you give this, within the Islamic, so you give the Nasri Islami, you give the other groups, because they are people that will be affected. So classification of stakeholder, those who have insight, expertise, that's what they call all the expert professors who have dealt with this job, maybe professor of corporate law, political scientists, economists, religious scholars. Then you go and bring those who be affected. That's the two notion of stakeholder in public hearing. But don't do that. So maybe somebody has put in a course advert on a newspaper
in one small
tiny place. Say National Assembly Committee on XC will hold public hearing. So the details and now the requirement. This kind of law, and this is where society and state work together. This kind of law would have people who would have gone through it, and they'll flag all the issues. And it becomes part of strong, ongoing discussions in the social space. Yes. People say, okay, these provisions, why people now come and present papers on why this could be dangerous, on why this is not acceptable. Now, even the legislators themselves will take it to their constituencies. Some of them are members of religious groups themselves. Some of them are also members of Islamic groups. So they will take this back to the people, and then the conversation is what will come and speak. So if you watch a typical public hearing in Nigeria, it doesn't even last parliamentary hearing. You rarely see a legislator come out with graph, come out with presentation, take like 5 minutes to talk about why this law should pass or not pass. So all the statements are peremptory. Most of them are brief, and then it's a matter of, except where interest, maybe confirmation of a minister and they have interest at home, not to get that person confirmed, then you see some kind of sustained
activism and whatever.
Some kind of sustained conversation.
So perhaps there's a serious problem in the processes of lawmaking and policy formulation.
And the quality of engagement.
Yes.
So for formulaic, in terms of what the provisions of the Constitution from Section 60, processes for making law, they seem to be okay. First hearing, second hearing, third hearing, these are typical.
As provided
for law. But what is missing now is the quality, the legislative competencies, this position of the legislature, because it's actually the legislators who radicalize these things elsewhere.
Some would have to have a second section to discuss the processes of policy making, law making, and especially the people's participation at every level. But just to say that what it means is, to me, all that you have outlined, is that the way I hear a lot of, maybe large proportion of NPOs, non-for-profit organizations, shouting about this thing now, it means many of them were not aware this was coming.
Absolutely. Nobody knew about it.
Many people were not aware. And if I get to discover that this was during the lockdown,
which could be possible.
if they didn't do it,
then it's fraudulent. Then it's mischievous.
Then there may be some mischief in it. Yeah. But what I hear some church leaders shouting, I don't believe is the right process.
No.
The right process is to analyze it the way we are doing, and then have a concerted representation
and develop a brief
yes.
that articulates the danger, not just yourself. So this is not like a selfish We're talking about
the danger
its
to
impact
all
democracy,
other, yes,
free speech,
yes,
and religious freedom.
So that your own specific interest will be within the context of the public interest. So that
exactly.
you don't just come out and make statements that
looks like, oh, this is targeted to take my kingdom. No, that's not the point. The point is that this is
I have
against
heard some of
public
such
interest.
things, and I wasn't happy.
It's a bad. It does bad publicity because it creates the impression that there's actually something wrong that you guys are hiding.
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is that even if the religious groups are run as clean as white,
let us see it.
Even if you say this same law is not necessary, it's cost more than the benefit.
Yes.
The state has a lot of rules, capabilities, and laws to use to deal with erring church or
even before
Islamic
now, the 1990 Cama. Right?
There were so many rules.
The rules are there.
They're very clear. The
annual returns are there.
And if people read through those reports, by the way, Nigerian culture, the strange that this new rule will not stop misbehaving because nobody will even bother to look at this document. They don't look at this. But it will now trigger political visibility. When you seem to be the bad guy, who is not,
then they'll come after.
They go after you. It's not like they're going to use it against the bad guys who are politically invisible. As long as the bad guys are screaming.
And it is that lack of trust between the citizens and their leadership that is really troubling.
Absolutely.
And it is increasing in this society. Mm-hmm. Even the COVID-19. Why is it that many people in public are not wearing masks? Mm-hmm. A lot of the people don't trust what we say to them.
And the expenditures people are asking for now. Femi Falana has written, say, central banks, tell us who you have given this money. So even in terms of ethical equity and ethics, the state even lacks the moral, the good faith, the bona fide, to be the ones regulating for so-called corruption. When the state process, which is actually where higher public interest is in making open the process of public governance, and not necessarily the private governance. So even if there are risk and harm that people who subscribe to religious groups suffer at the hand of erring leaders, one can argue that there's a greater public interest in protecting, in opening up the system of public governance, where people don't voluntarily subscribe to, where people are compulsorily, we belong to the state, we pay tax, we are part of it, so we don't elect to be part of a state, we are already part of a state. So there's a greater public interest to protect citizens who are already trapped, so to say, from the abuse of people in power. And we're not seeing the same degree of moral, aggression in opening up the process, accountability. Think about the school feeding that looks like a fantasy story. I mean, the people, so much was spent feeding people. So people are saying, tell us how this happened. Nobody's providing that, process. Nobody's giving accountability.
So what we end by saying, what we are saying is that we need good governance. We need democratic processes to be respected.
And we need to respect the freedom. The good governance and economic development does not necessarily require invading people's
fundamental
liberty.
rights.
That's really
on this note, we will bring this segment to an end. I have been speaking with Dr. Sam Amadi, constitutional lawyer and senior lecturer in law at Bayes University. We would meet again to discuss further on this very contentious issue of Cama 2020 and for the public interest of the public, who should be part of these discussions. God bless you.